Hello and welcome to the latest in a series of GSA Insight Webinars, where today we're digging into mmWave 5G and the challenges and opportunities for turning it into a reality in the Asia Pacific region. First, a little bit of housekeeping before I turn over to Boya to formally open the event. There is an opportunity for you to ask questions using the chat function on the sidebar. Please do pose your questions as we go through the agenda. The session speakers and moderators will be able to see your questions and use them to guide their discussion. You can download the presentations at any time during the event. Simply hover your mouse over the slides and click on the little download button. Immediately after the event, you will also receive a link to the full event recording, the full set of presentations, and a copy of the GSMA's report, The Economics of mmWave 5G, which will form part of today's discussion. But to get things started, I'd first like to hand over to Boya, GSA APT Chair, who will share a brief update on the GSA's activities. Boya.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all. And I'm Boya Liu from GSA APT. It's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of GSA APT Group, I would like to thank you all, the distinguished speakers and audience, for joining us for exploring how to turn 5G mmWave into a reality in Asia Pacific. And GSA, the Global Mobile Supplier Association, has been promoting the 3GPP technology roadmap via research initiatives and the global focused reports. The research and reporting has covered almost everything for 4G to 5G devices, mobile networks, fixed wireless networks, deployed mobile technologies, chipsets, and far beyond, as well as the spectrum allocations, pricing, and usage. The research and industry data are all stored in the GSA database. And GSA Internal has focused the working groups and forums on spectrum, standards, research, FWA, etc. The GSA Spectrum Group is formed with spectrum and technology specialists from GSA executive member companies, which are Apple, Ericsson, Huawei, Intel, Nokia, Qualcomm, Samsung, and ZTE. And GSA Spectrum Group is split into regional focus teams in Asia, Africa, Arab states, Europe, Russian CIS, US Americas, and the country team in India. In addition, global spectrum teams included high band, mid band, and low band teams, licensing teams, as well as the ITU team, and the recently established the 6G team. Within APT region, we have APT Group, India Group, ASEAN Group, Australia and New Zealand Group to cover the diverse needs among APT countries. Over the past few years, GSA APT Group has advocated for release of licensed spectrum for IMT services and have promoted deployment of 4G and 5G technologies in low, mid, and high band spectrum through active involvement and contribution into APT meetings and national groups and consultations, as well as various events where cooperating and collaborating with other industry, global, regional, and national organizations. 5G is already a reality, and 5G rollouts continue to accelerate around the world, and APT has been one of the leaders in 5G development. 5G means not only the technology development, but also the development of spectrum low, mid band, and as well as the high band. The high band that we are discussing today is the key band to provide the ultra experience layer and the leading foundation for 5G deployment. Today, we will have a very good webinar covering APT regional context, global mmWave trends and regional status, economics of mmWave 5G, industry panel on business model, and regulatory model to deploy 5G mmWave, exploring at the various aspects of mmWave band and discussing how to turn 5G mmWave into reality in Asia Pacific. With that, I would like to conclude my opening remarks, and again, thank you everybody for joining us. I would like to hand the floor to Mr. Tuan, our chairman of the APT Wireless Group.
Thank you. Today I would like to joined the meeting to speak as the chairman of my IBT Wireless Group. My first word is to thank you to GSA, especially the coordinator of GSA Spectrum Group, IBT team, Mr. Oya, for letting me the opportunity to speak today. I think the topic is quite it's really interesting and it really time to promote millimeter wave 5G. So I think that and I think it's the time that we need hand in hand to try to promote this. And as the brief introduction from Ms. Boya, that we see that the ongoing development of 5G, and 5G is will be a key infrastructure for to build up a social digitalization, digital social and society, and digital transition that will benefit for all and allow for the digital economy. We know that the 5G is not just an evolution of 3G or 4G technology. It encompasses a much wider range of performance metrics, including enhanced mobile broadband, ultra-reliable, low-latency communication, and the ability to connect massive machine-type communication. And to meet the requirement, as Ms. Boya just said, we do need the low, middle, and high band for 5G. But in my view, and 5G, the true 5G, it only be rely if we do have the millimeter wave spectrum. Why? Because the importance of millimeter wave spectrum is closely connected to the last amount of bandwidth that become available when allocating this range of 5G mobile use, allowing for the extremely high data rate that when we talk about 20 times higher rate than 4G, we need really the millimeter wave band. The high reliability and the short latency. And with the millimeter wave spectrum, the full capacity of 5G can become the true available. So what we can do in AWG to promote it? Few words about ABT AWG. In AWG, we cover various aspects of emerging wireless technology, including the 3G, 4G, and 5G technology. One key principle for the AWG to facilitate the regional harmonization of spectrum uses. So one of our key tasks in AWG is to promote the harmonization for the 5G spectrum, including the millimeter wave bands. For the 5G spectrum harmonization, AWG is it can be the foremost intergovernmental and private sector regional forum to address the multilateral engagement on spectrum and technical issue. And AWG, we try to ensure that in regional condition and requirement are addressed. For example, the regional difference in radio regulation, national requirement and timing. local energy requirements. We AWG to achieve some can say initial but important outcome. We have approved 112 reports and 11 recommendations. That including the recommendation is famous APT 700 MHz band, or recommendation for frequency arrangement in the range 694, 894 MHz for PPDR or for license share access. We do have a number of reports, as I mentioned earlier, like the APT report on study on coexistence between IMT technology and between IMT 2000 technology and other wireless access technology in adjacent and near adjacent frequency bands. APT guideline on technical condition for the use of mobile phones on board aircraft, or APT report on frequency arrangement for 2.3 to 2.4 GHz band for IMT, or APT report on information of mobile operator frequency technology and license duration in Asia Pacific countries. This report is widely used by applications around the region, and as a reference for them to consider when they're making the frequency arrangement frequency plan in the country, and it helps to promote harmonization a lot in our region. Quite a lot other report. I report on the use of intelligent transportation system in APT countries, or report on PPDR application using IMT beyond technology and networks. And also the report on 608 to 960 MHz frequency arrangement, national allocation and assignment for IMT, or frequency arrangement for IMT in the band 470 MHz to 698 MHz. APT report on sharing and compatibility study for IMT above the 24 GHz band for APT region. And APT report on study on implementation aspects of IMT 2020 in the frequency band below 6 GHz in APT. Or APT report on current status and future plan of implementation and deployment of IMT 2020 5G in APT. And also APT report on mitigation measures to improve sharing and compatibility between LTE 4G and 5G LR system, and as a system operating in portion of 3.3 to 4.2 MHz band. So that is the old report has been approved. So currently we still have quite a number of work items relating to the 5G, including developing frequency arrangement for 5G in the L band for the band 3.3 to 3.4 and 4.8 to 4.99 GHz bands. And we are undertaking sharing study between terrestrial and satellite IMT system in 1.98 to 2010 megahertz. Sorry, 1980 to 2010 megahertz, and the band 2170 to 2200 megahertz band. We also undertake the work of developing APT-specific 600 MHz plan for regional harmonization. So high relevant of millimeter wave implementation and web seminar is an AWG work item on study on 5G implementation in frequency band above 24.25 GHz band. So I think that with that work items, we hope that we can have the members, including the country member and industry, to promote the millimeter waves use in for band for 5G in specifically and spectrum in general for 5G. And with that, I would like to close my speech. And I wish the meeting a great success. And now I would like to hand back the phone to the GSA chair. Thank you.
Okay, if you want to kick off with the GSA slides, that'd be great.
Yeah. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think I'm honored that GSA has given me opportunity to talk on the millimeter wave spectrum. I really concur with the views that Mr. Tuan has shared, that if he really wants to experience the true 5G, then millimeter wave is very important spectrum that we should look for. This slide is nothing new. We know that we need a spectrum from each and every band in low, mid, and high. But every spectrum has its own propagation characteristic, provides to find a good balance between the coverage and capacity. Millimeter wave is very important because it provides a very large bandwidth, and if you really want to experience the true 5G, and either we can support a large number of users given the bandwidth, or we can provide ultra experience applications to a set of users. In both ways, the higher bandwidth it's a very important element in the spectrum. So yeah, so this is I think so. Once we see the spectrum as opportunity, then we look for the market. Interestingly, the data shared by the Bell Lab provides a great insight on how many the petabytes are being consumed in various places. For example, when there are shopping malls, stadiums, indoor. So there are various places where you can see the amount of spectrum, amount of data is being consumed. It goes over 4,200 petabytes. So if we have to support this kind of data consumptions, we definitely need a much higher bandwidth. And this is just a number which is indicative number. Sometime as the user picks up and the kind of application that will be developing, and the interest of the user may go beyond this number what we are seeing on the screen. And this is a market that we are seeing. If you see the UK operator evaluation, it's actually an incremental market of about 300 million euros. So it's a good market that we see. Going back to once we have the opportunity, then we look forward for how much ecosystem is, how much administration has adopted this millimeter wave deployment. So you see on the screen that about 487 operator in 145 countries is either investing in 5G network. It can be in any form. It can be test, pilot, maybe licensing, but they are doing it. And out of those 200 operators, at least 78 countries and territory has already launched 3GPP 3GPP compatible 5G services. It can be the form of a mobile, or it can be fixed access wireless. But at least we can see the growing interest in the millimeter wave from the operator community, and that's a very positive, at least I see. You see the eagle-eye view of how the 5G is being deployed, network being launched or deploying. You can see the USA and the Asia Pacific region. There's more interest in the 5G in terms of deployment. It's a soft launch, or it can be deployed as a whole. Where the African continent has yet to pick up in terms of that. See the graph. If you see the graph right side, the train is a very interesting trends. Initially, operator were investing, but as we go along, we see there's a interest in investing in the launched both. So it's just not the initial excitement, but also there's a true business interest in millimeter wave, and that's therefore we see operators are not only investing and experimenting, but they're launching as well. So it's a very positive trend that we are seeing in millimeter wave. So this is something very encouraging, I would say. So once we have this, this is about the 5G, but what's happening to the millimeter wave? So even millimeter wave is progressing very well. 192 countries and 192 operators and 48 countries at least have been investing in any form, in trial or planning or whatever. Out of them, the whole millimeter wave spectrum range from 26 to 48 gigahertz being divided in 26, 37, and 47 gigahertz band. We see 26 and 28 has garnered much attention in terms of operator interest in the deployment. 140 operators, at least in 24 countries, are holding license and enabling mmWave in 26 and 28 gigahertz and 37 and 47 gigahertz. You see there's a much interest in 26 and 28, and of course 37 and 47 gigahertz is also like a runner-up. They are progressing well, and as we see the whole eagle-eye view that how American and Asian region are being embracing the millimeter wave much faster than the other region. As I say, the African continent and the Chinese region is yet to pick up, and I believe that they will be in good progress. So once we see that the operator interest, we see the administration are working to provide licenses, then how the ecosystem looks like. It's very interesting that we have at least 97 commercial devices available in millimeter wave, and we can see the Samsung and Lenovo are having a good market share in millimeter wave, and I think the other vendors who are not listed here, they are also being progressing very well in creating the more mmWave device. It's very imperative as we see more interest from the operator, the vendors. We will see a growing number of the device and the infra vendors in millimeter wave. So at least the trend looks very positive, and at least shows that availability of mmWave device in the market. That shows that how the community is embracing the mmWave spectrum as a whole. As you say, it's just, when we say the device, it's just not only the mobile. As we are experiencing a new era of mobile communication, the mobile as a phone is becoming misnomer, and we are seeing a different set of mobile devices, which not only limited to phone, but it has a different Cpe module, it has a laptop, USB dongle, and tablets, and I'm sure there are a number of more devices which we will see in coming time. So when we see more and more devices, ecosystem is growing. We see that the spectrum range in 26 and 28 gigahertz has a much more device ecosystem which has built up, and of course 37 gigahertz is being following up. So that's something we are seeing the trends. It's like market is very well established for 26 and 28 gigahertz. The commercial device, as I say, is 97 devices are available, and 44 out of them is phone, and at least millimeter wave device 70% are from the commercial devices. So that's something. It's like an ecosystem that is being developed for mmWave. Although the slides are not up to date, but I think it's generally recent, maybe a month or 2 month old, but it's generally okay. if you see the whole the globe in terms of a spectrum assignment, allocation, licensing, it looks that the Asia region is being Asia and the US region embracing the 26 and 28 gigahertz together, while at least European region is maintaining certain bias towards 26 gigahertz. That's something is very important, and I think at least the operators, the regulators play a very key role in such assignment. For example, maybe for instance, like we have a good debates ongoing in 21.5 in ITU and AWG. Any unhealthy choice of regulation will have a serious impact on the deployment. And when we see although the regulatory measures has a impact everywhere, but when we see in millimeter wave, when the cell size is not huge, then if we have more strict regulatory measures, then it's not the pain, it becomes a decision. As long as the constraints are too heavy, and if we lose out
and so the technical glitches begin. Whilst we wait for Diwakar to hopefully rejoin, I think we're almost at the end of his slides actually, so I'll just move on to the next slide for Diwakar. And here he is. Diwakar, you're back here.
Yeah, right. Fine. So can I go back? Can I go back? Right. So as we say that it's very important that we put the right regulatory measures. Otherwise, we might see. Otherwise, when this, for example, when we see the millimeter wave deployment, the cell size it starts shrinking. It makes a lot of economic. It has to make economic sense to really kick off and get the attention from the operators. So a good regulatory framework is very important to really kick off them. mmWave is a message here. This is something coming from the history, what we see from 2018 to 2022. We see that initially only in the US and Korea has taken the lead. But as we see the growing interest from the other administration, and now we see many administration has a great interest in mmWave deployment. And as I say, there are operators who are 192 operators in 48 countries investing. We discuss about that. And of course, the 28 gigahertz has a larger interest. 40 gigahertz is being kicking off. At least in US, they have taken a leadership. So that shows the administration interest in mmWave, I think, and that's what probably we are saying the trend here, right? I would like to draw the attention. I think Mr. Tuan has also mentioned that AWG is preparing a report on 5G implementation band beyond 24.25. I would like the members to see the report, and it has a lot of insight, not only in terms of the in terms of spectrum embraced by 3GPP, but it has a very important aspect of case study from the coexistence. So it also shares the new insight about how the administration are choosing the coexistence between the different services. So in general, when we say spectrum, at the moment the whole traffic demand dictates what kind of spectrum is required, and then we see the suitable spectrum where the technology can be developed. And when we see there's a spectrum and good technology is available, we see the sharing, how many other services are contending. And if there's a sharing possible, then we try to do a good sharing studies and find the regular good measures to stay in coexistence. And if there's no possibility, then we try to find out that what's a good socioeconomic value of the spectrum. So that's how it's being, but with the growing advancement in the technology, it's very important. And not only the characteristic, but actual technology in advancement should be embraced while considering the interference mitigation mechanism, just to avoid additional buffer in the spectrum, which makes actually the users inefficient. So this is something I would like the readers to see the report, and it has a lot of insight. At the end, we'd like to give a message from GSA that the 5G ecosystem is in place, expanding, and infrastructure device are available. Market is growing, so I think it's a very good landing. Number of device and infrastructure are expected to grow with the deployment of mmWave by operators. The license spectrum from low, mid, high band will actually enable the full 5G vision. The commercial deployment license are underway and ongoing globally. The GSA support Asian countries to roll out the 5G, including mmWave spectrum, and recommend to consider the individual wide area network national licensing and in 2022. So infrastructure and device are available and the market is growing. That's a whole message I can share from the GSA. And thank you very much. This is what my submission to this presentation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Duaka. And all the data you've seen there is available to GSA members and GSA associates subscribing to the Gambod database. So I would certainly encourage you to dig into the Gambod database and start exploring the whole breadth and depth of data that GSA has on millimeter wave devices, spectrum, and deployments. And with that, turn over to Federico from GSMA Intelligence to talk through their latest research on the economics of millimeter wave 5G.
Thank you, Richard, and good day to all our honorable guests. My name is Federico. I'm a senior economist at GSMA Intelligence. Real quick, we are the analyst arm of the GSMA, and we provide data, research, and analysis for the mobile industry. So the pros and cons of millimeter wave, put together this slide as an introduction. So it has a short range. This is well known. It has difficulties penetrating indoors, and so new deployment strategies are required. On the other hand, data traffic is growing rapidly. High speeds and low latencies are a must for 5G, and millimeter wave bands provide more spectral bandwidth and contiguous spectrum than any other band. We've seen there are devices available and rollouts all over the world. So I guess the key question is, under what conditions deploying millimeter wave is a cost-effective alternative? So to answer this key question, we have developed a TCO model. We have a host of factors, including population density, the area to cover, the number of subscribers, coverage requirements, performance requirements, the frequency bands used, and these together form traffic demand and traffic supply that allow us to determine the total cost of ownership. We look at different scenarios and different deployment strategies. We look at the dense urban scenario up to 2025 and look at whether deploying millimeter wave on top of midband would be cost effective versus midband alone. And we find that in a dense urban area in China, millimeter wave would be cost effective when connected users are above 5% when at peak, and in dense urban Europe when they are above 10% at peak. We construct our scenarios looking at satellite data, so that we look at hypothetical areas built on real data. In terms of fixed wireless access, we look at two deployment strategies. The first one is midband only versus millimeter wave only, still up to 2025. And then we look also at midband only versus midband plus millimeter wave. And we find that millimeter wave only fixed wireless access can be cost effective if the operator manages to capture a good share of the residential broadband market, and this in urban China, suburban Europe, and rural US, with cost savings up to 34% when data consumption goes high or grows very fast. And this result is sensitive to some assumptions, such as the UL-DL ratio. The higher the UL traffic, the more millimeter wave is cost effective, and on data demand, data consumption growth. The more data consumption grows, the more millimeter wave becomes cost effective. In terms of 5G fixed wireless access, we are recently doing some work on comparing fixed wireless access and FTTH, fiber to the home, and especially trying to determine under what conditions 5G FWA is a cost-effective deployment strategies. And we look at the same scenarios, millimeter wave only or midband plus millimeter wave. And this in urban, suburban, and rural areas in Europe, US, and Latin America. We have recently published a report on this, and we find that millimeter wave only 5G FWA is generally cost effective when the fiber cables cannot be deployed using existing ducts or poles that can be shared or rented. The results of midband plus millimeter wave FWA are going to be published very soon at the MWC Barcelona. So please stay tuned. You can see on your right-hand side that we look at different CPE strategies as well, and we find that the use of different types of CPEs, customer premises equipment, can change the cost savings. So the use of outdoor antennas or CPEs, or the use of high power CPEs can improve cost savings with respect to standard indoor self-mount CPEs. Finally, we also look at a large enterprise office like scenario. We compare midband versus midband plus millimeter wave. And we look at a hypothetical office building where indoor coverage is very limited, and so just a little bit of traffic can be offloaded to outdoor public networks. And we find that millimeter wave plus midband indoor office 5G network can be cost effective and generate cost savings of up to 54%. And this value of cost savings depends on the share of devices that are concurrently active at the same time, and to what extent there is a need to enable the next generation video comms, such as holographic communications, AR, VR. So the key takeaways of our study is that in urban areas, a millimeter wave capacity layer on top of a midband layer can be cost effective when traffic demand is really high. So when you have a big market share or there is a lot of concurrent demand. 5G millimeter wave FWA can be cost effective versus fiber to the home in rural towns, urban and suburban areas in Europe, US, and Latin America, whenever fiber cables cannot be deployed using existing ducts or poles that can be shared or rented by the operator. So when the operator has to build these ducts or poles. And finally, in an indoor enterprise-like scenario, small millimeter wave indoor cells that complement midband layer are cost-effective for high levels of concurrent demand. So we recommend operators not to underestimate the role of millimeter wave in the short run. We recommend governments to make clear plans for the assignment of millimeter wave bands, and vendors, obviously scale is key. A wider choice of devices, equipment will reduce cost as economies of scale kick in. So if you are interested in reading more, you can go to our website and find these reports I've been talking about. More details and sensitivities are available there. And in case you want to discuss about assumptions, modeling, I'm really happy, so please get in touch and we can discuss further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Federico. With that, we'll start turning to the first of our roundtable discussions, and Boya, I'll leave it to you to introduce the first of our speakers.
Thank you, Richard. Around the world, we have seen the leading operators have been start to deploy the 5G networks, and full capacity 5G is enabled when operator deploy 5G networks with millimeter wave spectrum. And millimeter wave development have been already begun in some countries, and APAC as potential leader in our commercial millimeter wave deployment. Today, we have invited the leading mobile operators and vendors, DOCOMO, Aju, and Ericsson, and GSMA to discuss the business models for the 5G millimeter wave deployment. So today, now we have the panel part. And firstly, I'd like to now introduce our first speaker, Dr. Hiroyuki Atarashi, Senior Manager of the RAN Development Department from NTT DOCOMO.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Liu. This is Hiroyuki Atarashi speaking from Japan. I hope everybody is safe and healthy. First of all, thank you very much, GSA, giving a chance to DOCOMO to present our 5G millimeter wave experience in this webinar. Before the panel discussion, I prepared several slides for background information for the audience, and I quickly go through them. DOCOMO launched its 5G commercial service in March 2020. After that, DOCOMO's 5G network has been continuously enhanced. And one of the key technology element is the use of the millimeter wave frequency band, which was started in September 2020. And this is the basic information of our network. The operating frequency band is 28 gigahertz using 400 megahertz bandwidth. We are using 5G non-standalone operation. Maximum theoretical downlink speed is 4.1 gigahertz, and the uplink speed is 480 megabps. At the beginning of 5G millimeter wave commercial launch, 160 hotspots were deployed, and 2 smartphone models were available. And this is a picture of the radio unit for the millimeter wave. Currently, more than 3,000 base stations licenses have been issued, and a similar number of hotspot cells are deployed. 7 devices are now available, including 6 smartphone models. This is an example of the 5G service area map. So this red area is a sub-6 5G deployment. On the other hand, millimeter 5G deployment is, you can see some purple dots. So these dots indicate the outdoor deployment of the millimeter 5G. And also you can see some mark M. So this M stands for the millimeter wave 5G deployment for the indoor hotspot environments. And this is my slide summary. DOCOMO's 5G millimeter wave service was launched in September 2020, and smartphones were available from the beginning. And 5G millimeter wave is used for hotspot deployment, both indoors and outdoors. And my last message is that sharing the best practices among stakeholders would be essential to facilitate the use of 5G millimeter wave. With that, I'd like to conclude my brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ashi, for sharing the experience of your millimeter wave deployment in DOCOMO. Next, we've got Mr. Magnus Ewerbring, Vice President, CTO APAC from Ericsson. Please.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here. So let's have a brief overlook on the millimeter wave from Ericsson's point of view. We're very proud. At the very beginning of 5G, we started right off with the high bands, then for a particular deployment in North America. Since then, it's spreading over the world, and not the least here in Asia Pacific. So what can we expect, and why should we have it? I think performance aspect is, of course, a key thing, then not the least the peak rates. But I think 2 other aspects. One is the consistent low latency, the other one being the cell speed. And in coverage environments of the millimeter wave areas, we can truly expect a lot. Here are some measurements we've done in the field, and in conditions in loaded environments, you can see unprecedented speeds. On the right-hand side, another aspect to consider, that is, of course, over time, the needed capacity. And here's one example of the assessing the capacity need in North America as an example. And you can see in a few years' time, it's predicted that the higher bands, the millimeter wave bands, will be needed. And I say with new services coming along, I would prepare my network for being ready for more demanding services in terms of performance and in terms of capacity. That brings us on to what the use cases will be. I think one aspect, which we've already heard of today here, is to have the millimeter wave bands fully integrated with the other bands. It is a clear addition to the assets that an operator has, using those spectrum bands together with existing ones. So that goes for any services. But with improved performance, of course, it drives new innovation of new use cases. Some examples you can see here together with the car manufacturer, we're looking at URLLC, how that can be used in precision manufacturing as an example. We're using it in Industry 4.0 scenario where you need very short download times, you need to have predictable latency. One aspect in production that's often comes up now is what they say is, use the term data showers. That's when the products are being programmed with software towards the end of the assembly line. Car manufacturers use it. We see it in electronics, in computers, etc. To really cater for this capacity, you need to have a lot of bandwidth. And here again, we see the high bands coming in very well. We're using millimeter wave already in our own factories. You can see here using inspection with AR glasses. We can improve the product quality, we can improve efficiency in the factory. Last area then to highlight is the consumer segment. Much innovation ongoing here with different kinds of XR applications. We've seen an example, not the least in South Korea, that when you have more XR content, you become more sensitive with advanced applications to having good service delivery. And again, you need predictable low latency. You need to have a consistent high throughput in your system. And indeed, millimeter wave can deliver on that. So lastly then, to wrap it up, to prepare your network for the future, do take in mind what capacity needs you will have going forward, and it will increase a lot. In our mobility report, we say by 2027, the factory need is up by a factor of 5. Fixed wireless access you have here as an example, you have the 5G part ever increasing. And then on the right-hand side, very important, combine all your frequency assets in any geographical area. In urban areas, you will have millimeter wave, you have the mid-band and the low bands. Give and take 2/3 of the world's population lives in cities. I think that's a great start to get millimeter wave coverage going forward. And indeed, that will shape and change the definition of how people use the internet. And that internet is mobile. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus, for sharing the insights on 5G millimeter wave performance, use cases, and deployments. Next, we will now hear a pre-recorded video from Mr. Brian Megan from Verizon, the US operator that was an early adopter of millimeter wave technology. Please, Richard.
We're seeing an increase of enterprise 5G use cases that are built on millimeter wave technology. This will translate to new revenue opportunities over time, in addition to opportunities in consumer 5G mobility and 5G home offerings. Our aggressive build-out and capacity gains through 5G can now be monetized with other use cases beyond just mobility. We expect industrial use cases to begin to scale in 2021 and have a very meaningful impact after that. Innovative XR technologies paired with Verizon's 5G ultra-wideband network can redefine how our customers engage in the future. As these XR ecosystems grow, Verizon's going to be there to offer the most powerful XR experiences. Also, I spoke about how important mobile edge computing is to 5G innovation. Well, MEC can also be an important revenue generator. MEC can only be created through partnerships, where Verizon brings our award-winning virtualized network, strategic IT assets, and brand. Verizon is going to benefit through cloud compute partnerships and bring availability zones for cloud services closer to the edge. And we've already met with a number of enterprises to start working on products and services. And that all ties to our current goal to have 10 MEC locations in 2020. Some of our key learnings have been around good partnerships. In order for us to bring 5G ultra-wideband service to more than 35 US cities, we've deployed thousands of small cells and countless miles of fiber. But we could not have achieved this goal without the support of forward-looking policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels who understand the need for policies that promote 5G while also preserving the pivotal role of local government in managing public right-of-ways. Those partnerships are vital as we continue to build a network that is intended to benefit people in the most impactful way possible. So we thank the FCC for their forward-looking policies that supported rapid build-outs of 5G technology, as well as the recent court decision that reinforced this approach. Another critical piece to our success is building the ecosystem with partners. So we created the 5G Tech Forum along with Qualcomm, Samsung, Ericsson, and many others to expedite the development of 5G global standards, which effectively shaved off around 18 to 24 months from the initial timelines. Today, that ecosystem is even more important, which is why we created the 5G Future Forum earlier this year, where we're working with leading wireless providers from across the globe to expedite MEC specifications. The third key factor to our success is the extensive testing of mmWave spectrum that we conducted in a dozen cities back in 2017. This was foundational to our 5G deployments. We learned really important lessons, such as how the signal will travel further than we'd originally anticipated and how high the signal could go. For example, the mmWave signal traveled several floors higher than we originally thought. These lessons played a key role in our deployment strategies. The massive bandwidth and low latency that mmWave provides is critical to providing transformational experiences. That being said, though, we've been very public about our plans to use a multi-spectrum strategy in our 5G deployments, but mmWave remains key. So let me give you an example of what's possible with 5G. As COVID has shifted away from large gatherings, we've seen how it can be utilized to create a unique experience for our fans and viewers. For example, at the Indianapolis 500 last month, Verizon's 5G ultra-wideband was used to transport fans into the center of the action during the live race. How cool is that? A high-definition, 5G-enabled, 360-degree camera was placed on the infield, and fans were able to access an augmented reality portal on their smartphone and be virtually transported to the track. These fans could control their view, choosing their favorite angles or perspectives, and were able to experience a unique front row style viewing experience from the comfort and safety of their own home. It's things like this that give us a glimpse of what's to come. In the end, although we've been faced with numerous challenges this year, what's most important to Verizon is the safety of our employees, customers, and our ability to provide critical connectivity during these unprecedented times. We know at Verizon we can't be distracted by things we can't control. Verizon has an incredible team, a tremendous set of assets, and a solid strategy. Coupled with the financial and technological strength to execute on that strategy and continue to be a leader in the industry, we create the networks that move the world forward.
Thank you. Next, I would like to invite the panel members for the roundtable discussions. We would have the Dr. Atarashi from DOCOMO, Mr. Magnus from Ericsson, and we also have Mr. Achu Amdekar, the General Manager from the Reliance Communications India, and Federico from GSMA. Now we are here. Wonderful. I'll start from the questions related with the spectrum requirement for the 5G mmWave deployment, as the spectrum is the basis for development. I would like to ask Mr. Achu and Mr. Federico that from your perspective, what's the optimum amount of spectrum required to enable the mmWave 5G deployment?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Ms.
can I?
Achu?
Yeah,
Yes, we can
yeah,
hear you.
yeah. You can hear me, Boya?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. Thanks, Boya. I think thanks to GSA also for inviting us and share our views. I think we are the biggest and the largest data carrying traffic operator in the world from the mobile, and we have a very big rollout of FTTH also. So together combined, we are carrying a huge amount of data on the network. And what we see is that this appetite for consumption of data is increasing every year. So in view of this, what we feel is that whenever we are allocating spectrum or thinking of what is the appropriate amount of spectrum, we should keep into view the technological advancements and also the need, the future need of the throughput requirements which are expected from the consumer point of view and also from the different applications which are going to come in the future. So in view of this, we feel that there should be three pillars on which the spectrum allocation should happen. I think the first pillar we feel is that we should not look at the spectrum from a short-term allocation perspective, like we allocate spectrum for 2-3 years for 5G, then we revisit the spectrum allocation for 6G because 6G is on the way. So what we feel is that instead of 2, 3, or 5 years horizon, we should look at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years horizon and see spectrum as a resource which is critical for a digital life, which is now a necessity. So this is the change we feel is necessary for getting the maximum output out of the spectrum. The second thing which the pillar which we want to see the spectrum allocation is from the change in the architecture which is happening, if I can say that. And earlier, if you see, we were having copper-based networks. Then we have end-to-end wireless networks. Then we have some fiber getting introduced, say up to MSC level in 2G. And now in the 4G world, what we are seeing and the way forward, what we anticipate is that there will be deep fiberization and we will try to reach, which we are already doing in the Reliance Jio, to reach up to the customer using fiber. Okay. Now with this, what does this indicate? This indicate that we are looking for unlimited bandwidth requirements or potential to deliver unlimited bandwidth to the end customers. So this is, I think, the driving force. And to meet this requirement, we need to understand that laying fiber across geography in a big country with diverse cultures and difficulties is not possible everywhere. Now, the underlying requirement is very high throughput requirements. And even if I am able to reach to the fiber to some extent, to bridge that gap, I need to use millimeter wave and to give a fiber-like experience. We need a fiber-like experience going forward so that we can build applications over them, services over them, and we are not worried about the backhaul or the bandwidth throttling or any such issues. So in view of this, we feel that our view is that we at least need a 2000 megahertz or 2 gigahertz bandwidth in millimeter wave so as to effectively deploy a terrestrial network. So that is one view which we have. The last submission which we have is that now we are moving from a old thinking of access network, backhaul network, satellite spectrum, all these terminologies we used to have. I think they are now merging. We are moving from an integrated access backhaul network where the end customer does not uh, differentiate between these technologies. And in view of this, what we feel is that we should give spectrum as a resource and treat it as a resource instead of dividing it into access, backhaul, resource, spectrum for satellite and all those things. So this is our three submissions which we have. And what we feel is that we should move ahead with a large spectrum allocation, so that in a terrestrial network which supports mass deployment of services to end consumer for a larger good, and that will help us in effectively bringing digital life to every citizen in this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur, for sharing your insights and experience from your Azure operator perspective regarding 2 GHz bandwidth requirement and also spectrum for integrated access and backhaul and forward-looking spectrum policy. Thank you. May I invite Federico to provide your insights regarding the required spectrum?
Thank you. So the GSMA recommends at least 100 gigahertz of spectrum per operator to be assigned. We are working on a spectrum needs piece, so please stay tuned. And I completely agree with what Mr. Atul said about the need for bandwidth and contiguous spectrum. And I would like to call out Hong Kong's approach to assigning millimeter wave spectrum. They assigned it for free, and this would enable operators to invest the massive amounts of money required to deploy 5G and millimeter wave.
Yeah, thank you. And my next question is on use cases when we have the millimeter wave spectrum, then what are the use cases are emerging for the commercial millimeter wave deployments, and what are the successful factors associated with these use cases? For this question, I would like to ask Magnus from Ericsson and Federico from GSMA on these use cases. Magnus?
Okay, thank you. Well, it's still early days, right? I wish I would know exactly what in the next decade here will catch on. But we can see already in many areas that use cases are very much benefiting from the high bandwidth that the millimeter wave gives. Fixed wireless access, we heard many times here, of course, that the XR-related content, as I mentioned before, for consumers and for enterprises, not the least. And then we see in dedicated installations, we see in arenas and such, where we can have staggering speeds. But I think a key thing is really to emphasize that millimeter wave in dense urban and urban environments should be on the macro sites as well. And we see such installations coming along now, not the least in Japan and other places here in Asia. And I foresee that we'll see much more applications coming around, unleashing the potential here of advanced XR content. I think the video we saw from Verizon is great. They are exploring the boundaries there with the Formula One car and 360 views and so forth. That's just a way to push the boundaries. The way industry pushed the boundaries, introducing 4G, driving up the app economy. And in a similar way, we will push the boundaries now for 5G with a significantly higher performance that millimeter wave delivers. Media rich, I dare say, predictable performance in wider urban areas. That's what I expect.
Thank you, Magnus. Then how do you think of this, Federico?
Thank you. So, as we've seen before, the use cases are dense urban fixed wireless access indoor. I think I would like to call out two very promising use cases. Fixed wireless access. Remember the need for bandwidth, and the residential traffic is much higher than mobile traffic, so millimeter wave can be very beneficial there. And also, if uplink traffic grows more than the downlink traffic, millimeter wave can be very beneficial there and shines bright in the uplink. And this is related to the second use case that I would like to call out, which is Industry 4.0 use case type. Been recently speaking with a client that they have deployed a private network in a manufacturing environment in automotive. And many of these manufacturing clients, they have, let's say, legacy equipment, so analogic, and they need to monitor and deploy their AI. And so they need webcams that are pointed to their measuring devices. And these webcams have high uplink requirements. And so millimeter wave is very beneficial there for this very reason. And low latency as well. So when you deploy, like Verizon said, MEC plus, so MEC plus millimeter wave, you get the low latency, high bandwidth that you need to enable these real-time insights. And it's all about the promise of 5G, right? And actionable insights that you can feed to your AI and solve issues or even prevent issues.
Thank you. Then we have some questions from the audience, like what has been the main factor that has driven the 5G millimeter wave deployment? So may I direct this question to Dr. Atarashi and Magnus? Dr. Atarashi, could you start?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. As you've seen in one of my slides, the current deployment is a hotspot type deployment for millimeter wave. In particular, those areas where many people will come, such as stadium, train station, airport terminal buildings, and maybe some university campus, for example. So providing high data rate experiences in those areas is important to improve the customer satisfaction. In addition to that, my company has retail shops to sell smartphones. And those retail shops are also covered by 5G millimeter wave. And in that case, potential customers who are interested in DOCOMO's service can try and enjoy high-speed connection of 5G mobile network. Therefore, providing high-speed data experience using the millimeter wave would be the first driver at the current point. Another potential driver would be a low latency. However, this aspect may need to be further explored, how this feature can be contributed to in real business. Thank you.
Thank you. And to follow on here what DOCOMO-san said, I very much agree with how you are starting with the high bands. You are, of course, fortunate in the sense that you are awarded the high bands as well as mid bands for new 5G deployment. Then if we look on the world as a whole, there are different scenarios. In some cases, overall, it's of course driven by what spectrum assets any one particular operator has. And in several cases, operators have not had the possibility to deploy mid-band and starts already from the high bands. Of course, if you have the choice, maybe you start first with the mid-band from a coverage point of view. But I think the advantage of coming into the high band is that you can start to really explore the true performance of 5G because it is an order of magnitude more. And I think that's what DOCOMO-san exemplified here. So I think that is the right way to go. Second aspect to consider is, of course, device availability. We saw that earlier in the GSA presentation here. It's starting to take off very well. And I think for the APT region here, that is an important thing. There are countries who still has to award 5G spectrum. And if I just highlight two, Indonesia and India, we're looking for regulation to come out. And I think all the potential to use the high bands there and with varying degree also use the mid bands. Both categories will be needed and make it available early for operators so that the evolution can be in the market space. And again, as we heard from DOCOMO, start to explore new services and really deliver the new dimension of services for consumers and for enterprises. I think we will have lots of innovation in the next few years driving this area. it is yet unexplored territory, and we're at the start of a very inspiring and I think demanding development to happen.
Thank you. Next interesting question also from the audience that as one of the operator that has deployed mmWave, what's the DOCOMO's experience in exploring how to use the mmWave spectrum effectively and how to monetize the spectrum? Could we have the response?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And it is a difficult question to answer, to be honest. According to my feeling, operators are still investigating how to use the mmWave spectrum in real business. As I mentioned, current deployment is a hotspot type deployment in some areas, and they are targeting for our customers. So like a B2C type business. But, and also, as I mentioned in my last message in my slide deck, sharing the best practices and usage scenarios for the mmWave deployment among the stakeholders would be very important and essential. And DOCOMO is also expanding a B2B type usage scenario for the mmWave, not limited for mmWave, but 5G in general. But we are trying to increase the use cases for B2B cases. So in this regard, maybe the operators should share, or vendors or other stakeholders should share their best practices, how to use the mmWave spectrum, and which will, I believe, which will facilitate the use of the 5G spectrum. So as I mentioned, operators are still looking for how to use the mmWave spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very useful insight and experience for all of the other operators and vendors. And as you said, that the communication and information sharing, experience sharing between the stakeholders are important and essential for facilitating mmWave deployment. And my last question for this industry panel is regarding the subject of our webinar, how may APAC area turn 5G mmWave into reality, and how may APAC be enabled as the leading region for the commercial 5G mmWave deployments? So I would like to learn your views on this. So I understand it's kind of forecast or brainstorming, please. Federico, would you like to start?
Sure. My suggestion would be to start deploying, gather the data, right, and see and gather your insights. Try to deploy or do trials, and so you can see what's going on in the KPIs and monitor your KPIs. That's my main suggestion.
Thank you, Federico. Then next, Dr. Atarashi.
Yes, thank you very much. As I repeatedly mentioned, sharing the best practice could be a key issues, and I hope this type of webinar is useful for us, and information exchanges amongst the stakeholders will be very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then Magnus.
I think APAC has great potential here. There are so many large cities with very substantial population living. In those cities, if you compare to the rest of the world, I'd say as a rule of thumb, the site grids are very dense. That speaks in favor of the higher bands. On top of that, there's also a strong tradition to do indoor systems. So I think it's a head-on start in a way. I think there's a great potential to really get it rolling here by various means, sharing practices, etc., and also drive the ecosystem. The sheer volumes in APAC will help to drive the number of devices and the cost of devices, drive that down. So my encouragement to APAC to take the lead here. There's really the chance with dense urban deployment, utilizing fully the millimeter bands together with the other bands.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the views, sharing, and discussions. So just to wrap up here, I think the key thing is to understand that we have the requirements, consumers, and the business will need and enjoy high speeds and low latency service for various use cases and scenarios. And to make this work, it's absolutely essential to have the millimeter wave spectrum and millimeter wave deployments. And we have seen millimeter wave deployments have already begun in some countries, also in some APT countries, and APAC is a potential leader in the commercial millimeter wave deployment, especially that in APAC area, there are lots of large cities. So sharing and the best practice among stakeholders would be essential to facilitate the use of 5G millimeter wave. So thank you all for the panel members and also for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for all your insights. We'll now turn to the regulator panel. So invite KJ to introduce the panelists, and first we have Shinji Ide from Japan.
Thank you. My name is Kyujin Lee, and I'm a moderator of these sessions, the regulators panel. Before we start, I want to say my appreciations all those panelists in these sessions. Particularly, you are very busy, but I appreciate your spirit to share your idea with the industries and operators, and also to the other regulators in these regions. With that, today we have the Japanese MIC, Mr. Ide, and Australian ACMA, Christopher Hose, and India TRA AI, Mr. Raja Sinha. So let me invite first Mr. Ide. And, Mr. Ide kindly prepared a slide for us. Would you start, Mr. Ide?
Hello, thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Shinji Ide, so I'm a director of the New Generation Wire Communications Office in Japan. Please let me express my gratitude to GSA for inviting me to this session. So I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share our efforts. So today I'd like to introduce efforts related to millimeter wave spectrum in 5G network in Japan. Right. So this is what I speak today. So firstly, I will explain about 5G in Japan, and then we'll cover challenges for rollout of millimeter wave, and finally, so our policy efforts to deploy millimeter wave base stations. Okay, next. Okay. So let me begin with my explanation. So this slide shows the frequency bands for 5G in Japan. And the bottom chart shows millimeter wave frequency allocation. So we allocated frequency bands in 2019 with 400 megahertz bandwidth with each in 28 gigahertz bands for mobile operators. So in 2020, 5G commercial services were launched, and millimeter wave base stations have increased. And by 2021, the number of millimeter wave base stations reached a total of over 10,000 by operators. Okay, so as Dr. Atarashi already shown this picture, but let me just explain briefly. This slide shows the current status of 5G coverage area by NTT DOCOMO, including the mmWave base stations at the center of Tokyo. The red area indicates the 5G coverage, and while green points are millimeter wave spots. And left picture shows as of the January 2022, just one month before, and the right hand picture shows the plan of coverage of a station in January 2022, 6 months later. And next one is a KDDI case. The orange and red colors indicate 5G the coverage, while the white spots are millimeter wave base stations. And this is a SoftBank case. The pink and red colors present 5G coverage, and the purple colors are millimeter wave. So as you see in Japan, so millimeter wave in 5G coverage areas is gradually increasing. So we, MSC, would like to promote 5G deployment for everyone, Japanese people, to receive 5G benefits. So let me briefly summarize the characteristics of the 5G. So as you know, 5G has 3 features, so which are mmWave and ULLC and MMTC. So especially millimeter wave can support high speed, high capacity, so which is mmWave, and low latency use cases. For example, so transmitting high resolution video for factory automation and remote medical care, and providing broadband to home as an alternative to fiber optics. So we think that millimeter wave is important to realize characteristics of the 5G, and it brings the real to 5G. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this slide shows the challenge of the millimeter wave. So it's well-known fact that much higher number of base stations are required for 5G than that of 4G. So this is because 5G uses higher frequency, and the base stations cover smaller areas. So we think that this causes 2 major challenges. So it is cost and location. So regarding the cost, a huge amount of investment is required by operators in order to install 5G millimeter wave base stations all over the country. For example, Japanese operators have declared that they are planning to invest several billion US dollars for the deployment of base stations by 2030. And the other issue is location. In principle, mobile operators are responsible for deploying their own base stations nationwide. However, to cover wide areas, they have to find many locations to deploy millimeter wave base stations. So we think that it is necessary to promote 5G deployment so that everyone can receive the benefit of 5G. So MSC is supporting operators in development of 5G base stations nationwide, including millimeter wave stations. So from here, I'd like to introduce 4 major efforts of MIC on 5G base stations, including millimeter wave. Okay, so next one. So the first is the concept of tax incentive. So in order to support the investment for 5G base stations, we have established a tax incentive system to deduct 50% of the amount of invested from payable corporate tax. For example, if a mobile operator invests 100 million yen, so which is $1 billion US dollars, for the deployment of 5G base stations in 2022 case, 50% of the amount, that is 50 billion yen, 100 million US dollars, will be deducted from a payable corporate tax. So this system will last for 5 years from 2020 to 2024. So as we would like to facilitate early deployment of 5G base stations, the deduction rate will be gradually reduced from 2023. So we expect that this tax incentive realize earlier deployment of 5G network in Japan. In addition, the deduction rate will be different between urban areas and rural areas to facilitate the deployment of 5G in rural areas. Okay, next, Open RAN. In the 5G, so base stations are functionally divided into CUDU, a central unit and distributed unit, and RU, radio unit. For example, the Urban Alliance, which is standardization body for establishing open interfaces in mobile base station, provides open front haul interface specifications between CUDU and RU in 2019. So as a result, operators can choose RUs and CUDUs by different manufacturers according to their own requirements. So MIC is promoting the openness of 5G base stations because Open RAN can realize the introduction and operation of low-cost and trustful 5G networks. So, and we expect that the Open RAN can contribute to early and efficiently expanded nationwide 5G network. Okay, so that's the next one. So sharing infrastructure. Okay, as I mentioned previously, so it is necessary for telecom operators to deploy a considerable number of 5G base stations to cover a wide area. So this is very costly for operators, and it is difficult to find appropriate locations for development of towers and the antennas. So therefore, infrastructure sharing is more important than before. So to solve that issue, sharing infrastructure, that is tower and antenna, both in outdoor and indoors, helps operators to save space and costs. So currently in Japan, so there are infrastructure sharing companies which provide services for deployment and maintenance of base stations on behalf of multiple operators. So in 2018, so we published the guidelines for infrastructure sharing businesses. So as a result, so mobile operators can reduce construction costs and operation costs, and operators save the cost to further accelerate to the development of base stations nationwide. So we believe that the infrastructure sharing is one of the effective ways for development of 5G network. Okay, next one, sharing RU. So this is further evolution of infrastructure sharing. The sharing of the base station unit is intended toward sharing not only towers and antenna, but also RU equipment. We think that sharing RU will further help operators to reduce space and costs, and it contributes to expanding service areas. However, there are some technical problems in regard to sharing RUs with multiple operators. For example, so mobile operators are using different frequencies, which means RU needs to be able to support several frequencies. So MIC has been conducting R&D for 3-year period from 2020 to 2022 in order to solve such kind of issue. So we expect that this will make it possible to further save space and power for base stations, and it will contribute to smooth deployment of mmWave base stations. Okay. This is my presentation. So we think that there are several ways to support mmWave base station. I just introduced the 4 cases, but there will be other measures to support mmWave base stations deployment. So I hope my presentation could contribute to discussion in this session. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Ite. It's very impressive policies. So before even I didn't ask the major questions of today, the one is what is the promotion policies, and what is the challenge, your perspective. But you already mentioned those areas. So let's listen to the experience of Australia. Mr. Host.
Okay, thank you and good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. So hello, my name is Chris Hose. I'm from the Australian Communications and Media Authority, which is the Australian national communications regulator, including spectrum management. And my role is head of the spectrum planning and engineering branch in the spectrum management area of the ACMA. So it's great to see many familiar faces. I hope we get to catch up again face to face soon. So I'm very thankful for being given the opportunity to talk a little bit about Australia's experience in millimetre wave, which has so far been solely in 26 and 28 gigahertz. So I'll aim to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've done so far in Australia. And I have a single slide, which I will move to now. Hopefully that's right now, just to give a bit of an overview of what we've done in Australia in 26 and 28. So we've been working on arrangements in these bands since from about 2018 and have now largely established frameworks in both the 26 and 28 gigahertz bands for a variety of spectrum uses. These include for terrestrial wireless broadband or 5G purposes, throughout much of the band in a mix of licensing and status arrangements. But we've also supported satellite services under various licensing and status arrangements. So we have a large geography in Australia where we have both higher population density areas where terrestrial wireless broadband is very important, but also large areas where satellite services are also important. So we've had the opportunity in 26 and 28 with significant amounts of spectrum to support both arrangements, to support both uses. In terms of 5G and mobile broadband and fixed broadband, one of the key things we've been working on in establishing these arrangements has to set up a framework to support a range of different users and use cases. So I think that's already been spoken about a little bit today. From our perspective, there was the traditional mobile network operator model, who generally like wide area licenses over long terms. There are those providers more interested in localized arrangements. They're perhaps wireless internet service providers servicing small areas, or private enterprise type users. And for both of those type of users, spectrum licenses, which is the framework we use for MNOs, isn't very suitable. They are looking for arrangements that are a lot more flexible and in some ways easy to use. So in this case, what we've done in Australia, in the 26 gigahertz band in particular, we've made 2.4 gigahertz of spectrum available in 26 gigahertz in arrangements supporting mobile network operators in particular. So that's the green segments you see here, S1 and S2. We've also made some spectrum available under a license exempt or unlicensed framework. We call it class licensing in Australia. And that's a spectrum in the yellow blocks you see at the bottom of the band, between 450 and 800 megahertz, depending on the specific arrangements. And the blue blocks that you can see there is a spectrum that we've made available for what we call apparatus licensing, more localized arrangements suitable for some of those other users that I mentioned before. The reason why you can see some of them overlapping is because there's a geographical split between them. So the green spectrum is made available in the higher population density areas, while the blue spectrum is available generally outside of those areas. The arrangements we have are quite complicated, so it's hard to give a very succinct picture of what they are. But at a higher level, that's what it is in 26. In 28 gigahertz, so above 27.5, what we've done is provided some additional spectrum where fixed wireless access, so fixed purposes only, not supporting mobile, is available in 600 megahertz of that spectrum from 27.5 to 28.1. Again, that's in higher population density areas. And much of the rest of the spectrum in 28 gigahertz is made available for satellite purposes, or again, fixed wireless purposes on a secondary non-protected basis. So as you can see, between 26 and 28, we've done a lot. We've put a lot of arrangements in place for different uses, whether it's satellite or broadband. And within the broadband framework, we've spent a lot of time and energy to try and set up the regulatory arrangements that suit a wide range of users in the band. So there was enough spectrum to take that opportunity up in mmWave, and this is where we've arrived. So with that, Chair, I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing that. And later, we may ask something a little bit more details. But now, may I invite Mr. Singha? Would you provide your initial insight for us?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. V, and good afternoon to all of you. Well, at the outset, let me extend my compliments to GSA for arranging this event. It is sort of a very timely arranged event on the theme which is resonating everywhere, since globally talks are happening about the use cases for millimeter wave as well as how to get the potential revenue from its various applications. Well, I am Rajiv Sinha. I am Principal Advisor in Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. And I also would like to extend gratefulness to GSA for giving me this opportunity to have an interaction with my esteemed panelists from Australia and from Japan, because they have already rolled out the networks in millimeter wave as well as in mid-band. So that will give to India, for me, an insight about how they have put to use the network and what could be the success stories in both the bands, particularly for the millimeter wave for which we are interacting today. In India, the millimeter wave spectrum is not yet assigned. However, it has been decided that we are going to allocate the spectrum from 24.25 to 28.5 gigahertz for IMT. And for that very purpose, we are under consultation with all our stakeholders so that we can recommend to the government the reserve price and other terms and conditions for uptake of 5G in India by making use of millimeter wave. The spectrum assignment is done by Department of Telecommunications based on the recommendations of the regulator, that is Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. With this opening remarks, I hand over to Dr. V so that we can have more discussion on the theme of the webinar. Over to you, Dr. V. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singha. All right. First of all, I was very impressed that the Japanese ministry has a specific office. The name is New Generation Mobile Communication Office. I believe that is the only official organizations in the government in the world only one. Normally the ministry or authority, they have the office for mobile communications or something. But it's very impressive that the new generation mobile communications. So first question is, actually that is not was not in my mind, but when I see your organizations, I have to ask that what is your feeling that your ministry has provided such specific office for the promotion of the next generations? So may I ask Mr. Ide on that perspective?
Thank you very much for asking the question. Well, so I don't think that there is only one office, the new generation mobile communication office in the world, but so actually, so we are looking for the future for benefit for the people, how to spread the benefit of the mobile communication. So we have to develop new mobile technologies, and we also think that and make a new policy to deploy such as 5G and the new mobile communication systems. So that is the reason why our office was developed, and so we like to continue to think the new methodology and new R&D, and try to find new seeds of technology for the future. Okay, well, that's my answer.
Thank you very much. And so I may ask the similar questions to the Chris and Mr. Singha. Do you have your within your organization have such specific group or office for such new generations mobile communications?
I'm happy to go first, Dr. Wee. So in the ACMA as a national regulator, we do not. 5G is worked on in the same organizational arrangements as we do for other broadband purposes. Having said that, our ministry, our department, our policy department is running various 5G initiatives to support innovation, for example. So from the regulatory perspective, we've really worked on establishing the frameworks on the spectrum side, but our parent, if you like, ministry is running some initiatives there involving grants and so forth to industry to trial and develop technologies and experiment with business cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Sinha?
Yeah, Dr. V, in Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, we also don't have any such specific separate center for new generation innovations. But we also, through our own policy framework, we do engage with various different department ministries, because we believe that 5G is basically an application technology, and all ministries and departments, other stakeholders, enterprises, they have to come together, they have to collaborate to make out best available use cases for their specific sector. And for that purpose, we are engaging with them directly through various means, various sessions and interactions, so as to apprise them about the usefulness of 5G for early adoption in India, as and when we roll out our networks, which is likely to happen this year after auction of spectrums. Thank you.
Thank you. Then my next question is, what is the most challenging issues when you licensing or decide some policies to use the millimeter waves? What was or what will be?
Well, if I can take this question first, because I think my other esteemed colleagues on the panel, they have already rolled out the networks in their territory. And we are yet to start the rollout of 5G in mid-band as well as in millimeter wave. So challenges what we foresee in India are the requirement of backhaul, because fiberization is a concern in India. We are not that good in fiberization. So we need a proper backhaul arrangement for which E-band is going to be of help to us. And we have also recommended to government to open this E-band for backhaul requirements of mobile operators. The next challenge what we foresee is, because millimeter wave will have lot of deployments of small cell. So there will be issues of right of way permissions, deployment of small cell on the street furniture. So there has to be a collaborative approach with various state governments, municipal authorities, civic authorities, and other similar type of regulators, maybe from electricity side also. So cross collaboration is very much required for effective rollout of 5G small cells. And then, of course, development of specific 5G use cases or country specific, so that uptake is there. When operators are going to take the spectrum, they have to monetize it also. So they need to have a proper use cases, both for public as well as for enterprises. So this is where is our focus for generating those specific use cases for effective rollout of 5G in India. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris or Mr. Ide, would you add something from your perspective? The challenge issues.
Thank you, Dr. Wee. I'm happy to make a couple of comments. I would agree with my previous speaker on many of those points. I should say that in the millimeter wave context, while Australia has established arrangements and allocated licenses, we are still quite early on in our deployment phase. So while there are some early deployments underway, it is very, very early. So nowhere well as advanced as Japan, for example. But I think in terms from the regulatory perspective, I'll say two main challenges just off the top of my head. One of which was the set of challenges I think many of us went through in terms of establishing the technical coexistence arrangements with other services, be it satellite and passive services. But we proceeded through that through WRC 19, and I think we have a way forward on those. We've implemented certain arrangements in Australia. The second challenge is really what I was mentioning before about establishing a range of technical licensing and allocation frameworks that suit a range of users and use cases. So I think it's very clear for us at least that we wanted to set arrangements up that could support a range of these users. The question and then challenge became what type of mix of arrangements do you have? How much do you optimize for one type of use case versus the other? So that is a judgment call. I think there's no absolute right or wrong decision there, but that's something that we worked through domestically and made our decisions on based on the best evidence at the time. So I think that it was a challenge, and I think it will always be a challenge, but something that I think it's a good thing. We had the opportunity to support these range of uses, and it was just a matter of how best to do it on an individual circumstances. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Mr. Ide, would you like to add some more? For what was the challenge?
Yes, as I explained in my slides, so from the telecom operator side, so the cost and the location is a very big issue for the deployment of the millimeter wave base stations. And from the regulators' perspective, We think that we would like to spread millimeter wave base station for most of the nation, most of the people in Japan to have benefit of the millimeter wave very first broadband connection. So we work especially in the rural area. But the rural area is not well profitable for the mobile operators. So our policy issue is that how to spread the millimeter wave base stations for the rural areas. So this is what we need to tackle for the future issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When I worked in the for the development of the 4G in 10 years ago, then I tried to initiate to share the informations among the global operators to share what they would like to provide, or what kind of the use cases from their perspective. At that moment of time, that I was very struggling. And finally, I failed to persuade them to provide their specific service scenarios and the plans, etc., to share globally. But having heard the previous sessions, discussions, and right now the even regulatory sessions, the use case or service scenarios, if we share that as well, not only in this area, but we need to start in this area first to share among the operators and among the other administrations. So that is already Dr. Atarashi has recommended to share that, and I believe that AWG is that most proper place in this area to work among the vendors, operators, and including the regulators. So before I close these sessions, I also would like to ask the Japan and Australia, and also even try India, would you provide some more detailed information in written form to the AWG, because the AWG chair has mentioned that within the AWG, they are developing the 5G implementations report. So your policies, if included there, then it certainly helps to the other all APT members to make a reference, and they will elaborate further. So as a wrap-up, I'm kindly ask you to consider provide details to the through the AWG, and making a great report of the 5G implementations, and how and what is your idea, and what is licensing schemes, etc. So I hope you work together within these regions. So before we closing, any additional comments from your side, if you have?
Yeah, Dr. V, if may I come in?
Sure, sure.
So thank you, Dr. V, for such a nice panel discussion. And from India's perspective, I would request my fellow panelists from Japan and Australia, if we can do it separately, not in this particular webinar, we can engage and we can find out from both the regulators what challenges they have faced while deployment of millimeter wave in their respective countries. What are the success stories, both for public deployment as well as for enterprises, that is for private networks, and whether there have been any sort of rollout obligations prescribed by the authorities for millimeter wave. We would definitely like to hear from you, maybe separately after this webinar. We will get in touch with you. And I hope you must have also faced these challenges and must have successfully encountered and come out of this and would be expanding your network. So we would be learning from you because we are on the sort of cusp of starting the rollout of 5G in India. So thank you once again to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm sure we will work together in future as well. Anyone would like to ask something more? And if you wish.
This is Shinji. Thank you very much for giving me this kind of opportunity to share our efforts, and we are willing to contribute to AWG and of course the contact with the other nations as a ministries, and so we would like to well, sharing the information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So likewise, Dr. Wee, thank you for chairing this panel, and thank you to my colleagues. I found it very informative, and of course, always happy to stay in touch with colleagues around the world on these issues. So thank you once again.
Thank you. So may I give the floor to the organizer, Ruboya, and I think it's your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wei. Thank you for the moderating the session, and thank you all for the speakers and the audience for the insightful discussions. And from today's webinar, we can see that 5G rollout is accelerating, and turning 5G millimeter wave into reality has already begun in APAC area, in Japan, in Australia, and also India will coming. And it's a good thing because millimeter wave is required to realize the full potential of 5G to enable a range of new use cases that are unable to be realized through 4G. And with the GSA, the Association of the Mobile Technology Vendors have been working hard, and the strong millimeter wave ecosystem emerging. We have seen that chipsets from the 5 vendors are available, and 77 devices are available, and 36 of them are phones, and spectrum is being made available, and the infrastructure ready and being deployed. We have heard directly from the leading mobile operators for their experience and their need for millimeter wave service to realize exciting new use cases, including AR/VR entertainment, millimeter wave FWA, integrated access and backhaul, industrial and enterprise, etc. Indeed, and 5G millimeter wave is already commercially available in some nations in Asia Pacific. And to enable this usage, we have heard that Jewel is of the view that a 2 GHz spectrum in the range of the 24 to 30 GHz per operator is needed. And we have also heard from GSMA that the economics of the 5G millimeter wave deployment makes sense. And also the keys to enabling 5G millimeter wave are held by the governments and regulator. And 5G millimeter wave cannot be commercialized until the radio spectrum is released. And in this regard, we have heard the experience from Japan and Australia, and also the plans from India. And many other APAC regulators have released or are actively planning for the release of millimeter wave spectrum for 5G, and we encourage them to make good on their plans at the earliest opportunity. So from the GSA APT team, we thank the moderators, panelists, and the audience for helping making today's webinar a success. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to just bring today's webinar to a close by once again thanking you all for joining us today. After the event, you will receive a link to the webinar recording and to all the content discussed today, both the PowerPoint presentations and the GSMAI report. The GSA data you've seen, which DOCOMO shared earlier, is taken from GSA's Gambod database. It's a unique search and analysis tool containing the most up-to-date information on 4G and 5G devices, networks, technologies, and spectrum. And as an industry resource, it's available to all employees of GSA executive and member companies and GSA associates who subscribe to the service. So if you'd like to dig into that, I would encourage you to explore the Gambod database. The next event is on the 31st of March, and that will be a plenary session for the GSA's 4G and 5G Fixed Wireless Access Forum. More information on how to register will be shared in the coming days and weeks. For the latest updates on all GSA research and activities, please do follow us on our social channels. You'll find the Global Mobile Suppliers Association on LinkedIn, on Twitter, WeChat, and Weibo. And if you visit gsacom.com, you'll be able to subscribe to our weekly Research Digest email and notifications for new reports. So finally, on behalf of the GSA team, all that remains to be said is, again, a sincere thanks to our speakers for giving up their time and sharing their valuable insights today, and to you all for joining us today. We hope you found it useful, and we hope to see you again at the GS event soon. Many thanks.